All right, so just a quick outline on what we want to try to do in quite a short session. So it'll be a little bit superficial, I guess. Um, I got a little slide just on why to monitor. I'm kind of expecting most people here, the reason why you're here is you know why you need to monitor. But it does no harm to reiterate the message. And then I'll just show you, I'm going to show you a few examples of the kind of stuff that's currently sort of baked in out of the tin if you do a DHIS2 install using our Ansible-based toolkit. And then this is some more recent stuff that the DHIS2 monitoring API, there's built in, a lot of people don't know it. Jason is going to show us a little bit about some of the potential you can get in terms of insights using the API. And Tito is going to give us a little demo, I think, of automating the deployment of Prometheus and Grafana with DHIS2. Okay, so why to monitor? Now, it's behind me, so I can't remember. There are lots of reasons to monitor. I guess it's if you're running a DHIS2 implementation. Now, bear in mind, I mean, DHIS2 is a relatively simple architecture. It's not all that complicated. You've got to, but we throw it into some quite difficult situations, right? With tens of millions of records and tens of thousands of users, usually the Android phone swarms. And any system is going to start to stress, right? Particularly when often you're throwing workloads at it that the developers haven't actually foreseen. They think it's going to be used like this, and they don't know in Bangladesh they're going to make 500,000 org units, right? So, yeah, in a day-to-day monitoring of any system, you need to have some metrics and stuff there to just understand your general daily health of the system. It's also really important in terms of provisioning. People always ask me, Bob, how big does my server need to be? I said, well, I don't know. It's how long is a piece of string? It depends. How are you going to use it? And then you make a thumb suck, but then when you actually start using it, you actually see whether you've made a good guess or not. You have to adjust. And I know that budgeting folk, that can be hard. So you always try to over provision. But yeah, do I have enough of this or do I have enough of that? I mean, the only way you can answer objectively is if you have good instrumentation in place, which of course leads into projecting your future resource requirements into the future. Disk usage is obviously an interesting one. Watching how your system grows on disk, you get a reasonable idea of what you need. Understanding the impact of configuration changes and upgrades and adding new programs and things like it's kind of really important. Yeah, you make a little change to the system, you need to have some way of knowing, have you made it better or have you made it worse? Or is this new program you've added, is it performing adequately? So anytime you're making changes, you're going to spend a lot of time looking at your instrumentation and metrics again. Diagnosing problems. This is a whole, we probably won't get too much into this, but I mean, many of you have found yourself trying to pick up a system that has died and trying to figure out how it got there. And again, have the better metrics that you have, it's really hard to diagnose any problems without it. There's a security aspect to it. This is particularly what you find. You know, a lot of systems that get hacked, and I don't say DHIS2 gets hacked all the time, but it has happened. Usually it's folk who are putting in these various like Bitcoin miners was the big thing. And you'd see it immediately. Suddenly your CPU's gone through the roof and there's nothing you've actually done that would rationally explain that. Then it's a good time to start looking, oh, is something going on there that shouldn't be? So detecting malicious activity or suspicious activity. If you have some kind of alerting system, and unfortunately on alerting, I mean, I've always tried to set up email-based alerting. It got more and more difficult, not for me, but for folk out there in the field, because doing email nowadays, you need to have more and more skill in terms of understanding the different DNS requirements and the like. Probably alerting systems based on stuff with an API like Slack. Telegram actually works really well as well. But yeah, you want to have a monitoring system which you can link up with your alerting system in some way to send alerts. All right, so I'm guessing I'm preaching to the converted largely with why to monitor. The more important question, I guess, is what to monitor. Um, there's general stuff you would monitor, whether it's DHIS2 or anything else. It's just your general system resources. Um, you've got three critical applications running there, and it could be more depending whether you've done some kind of horizontal scaling or the like. But at a minimum, you're looking at your database, the kind of things that we found is useful to look at with your database, besides its basic metrics. The connection pool and how it's being used tells you a lot about how stressed your system is or isn't. I've got a few graphs that I'll show you later. Finding out if there's any queries that have been running in your system for the last 3 days, right? With little ghosts in the background. You want to ask me something? Oh. Yeah. Sometimes DHIS2 gets into trouble because the transactions got blocked and it's holding a whole lot of locks and that holds everything else up. So these are things that are of interest to look at on the database. Reverse proxy is typically Nginx. Some of us are still using Apache, and I think increasingly people are interested in things like Caddy and Jason, what's your favorite at the moment?
OpenResty.
OpenResty. Right? It doesn't really matter. Reverse proxy just does what it does. The typical things you're looking at that again, a bit like the database, is your state of your connections. Then the DHIS2. Monitoring the DHIS2 is harder than monitoring where my donkey is going to eat grass. The DHIS2 is a beast of a thing. It's not the easiest thing to manage. I think all of us who've been doing it for some years know that. And it's kind of inevitable in some ways that it will be like that because, as I said at the start, it's used in ways that it was very hard to predict. One of the things that's really important I mean, you're going to look at just like any other Java application, you're going to look at your heap and check what your garbage collector is doing. Sometimes with the DHIS2, the garbage collector goes crazy, and that's a symptom that something's going on. Often when they have memory problems, the way that they actually present themselves is as a CPU thing because it's the garbage collector going. Yeah, and the ability to be able to assess the performance of individual endpoints. This is not what you're going to get of generic kind of monitoring software, but it can be really, really important. And this is where Jason's going to show us some cool stuff. I'll show you a little bit about what we do with Glowroot as well. Okay, Tito, can you keep moving? Thanks. Tools. Now, everybody has their favorite tools. We don't really, this is why they're not kind of baked in. If you use an installation method based on the DHIS2 server tools, currently maintained largely by Tito, it's an Ansible-based install. One of the good things about it, I mean, it's not perfect, nothing is perfect, but one of the good things about it is it gets all the monitoring stuff set up for you for free. And configuring monitoring systems can be a bit of effort. So it's one way that we found that people actually do monitor the system. If you just follow the what used to be the old manual of how to install DHIS2, it didn't mention anything about the stuff, and so people didn't do it. But if you use that, what you'll get thrown in for free is something called Munin and something called Glowroot. Munin is, I'll show you some pictures of what Munin looks like in a bit. Munin's not there because it's the best monitoring tool in the world. The reason why Munin is there was the easiest thing to install. It's very easy to install and it comes pre-configured with all kinds of useful graphs. We're trying to move away to using something a little bit more modern. Munin looks like it comes out of the 1980s.
It does.
Well, yeah, well, it's Perl, a lot of it. Yeah. But the only reason we use it because it does have some really useful graphs and it doesn't really need much configuration. You just install it. Tito's going to show us later about some of our efforts towards. We've also tried doing it with Zabbix, and more recently, we're trying to do a Grafana Prometheus thing. It's fairly easy to install Grafana and Prometheus, but automating it and making sure you got the right custom dashboards and things like that is where it gets a little bit trickier. So yeah, there are other tools. I'm not here trying to sell one or the other. People have their preferences. I'm just going to show you a few little examples now of the kind of things we get off Munin first, because even if you're not using Munin, these are the kind of things that are probably interesting to monitor. And then I'll tell you a little bit about Glowroot, and then I'm going to get off and hand you over to Jason. So, so that's what Munin looks like. Yeah, as I say, these kind of RRD tool, I think it's based on type graph. They look pretty ancient. They're not easy to zoom even. But they show you useful stuff. So I mean, one of the things that is very important to monitor. In fact, any system, any database system. I mean, in fact, in our case, it's Postgres, but it would be the same if you're looking at Oracle. You want to look at what's happening with your disk latency, particularly if you're in environments where you're VMware is my biggest hate in the whole world. Every VMware installation I've seen had problems with disk latency. Because people don't provision it as a database. They provision it just as a generic virtual machine. So what your disk latency means, it means how much time generally the CPU is waiting between trying to read and actually reading, right? Sometimes if the disk is very busy, or it's going to give you bad figures. So what we're seeing here is average in microseconds is good. Maximum going into a couple of milliseconds. This 8.37 millisecond, that's not so good. Generally, you want to be below 5, I would say, to be comfortable that your system's going to work okay. It's a bit of a thumb suck, but if you're dealing with good directly attached storage SSD disks, this will all be in nanoseconds. But let's look at another one. Here's an example of a disk gone crazy. Right, this was probably Bangladesh with your VMware. What's happening here? It looks like it's something that's happened in the night, right? Somewhere around 3 o'clock. This is the other important thing about a monitoring tool. Nobody's going to be up at 3 o'clock looking at it, right? So at least you have it there to look at in the morning. From about 3 o'clock onwards, we can guess this is related to an analytics run. Your disk latency starts going into up to 20 milliseconds. If you've got a disk with a latency of 20 milliseconds, you can count rocks faster than that, right? This disk is not going to give you good database performance. So that's one of the first graphs I look at. If I'm looking at a DHIS2 system that's struggling, what's happening with the disk in terms of the latency? That's usually a good symptom, that a good indicator of not much you can do about that with configuration. This is when you have to go back to your provider and tell them that they've given you a bad disk. You need more. You need better. Dieter, what have I got next? Yeah, I talked about the connection pool on the database. It's really important to monitor. This is running with looks like it's running with a very big pool, up to 220 connections. So your pool would typically go up and down like that. You're going to see most of the time on a healthy system, you'll see most of the connections are actually idle. That's been Munin samples every 5 minutes, and it counts within the 5 minutes. So a lot of the time, the connection probably will be idle, unless the system is really flying. When the system starts to fly, then these active connections, these green ones, will start coming up like that. On this graph, there are a few things I would worry about a little bit. This stuff, there's a lot more waiting for lock than there are active. That's an indication of some application problem. The transactions are blocking.
Analytics.
Sorry?
Analytics, maybe. It's at midnight.
Yeah, okay, that's during the analytics run as well, same time period. The other thing is this yellow stuff. You see this little bit of like a cream on top of the cake there, right? Those are connections with an idle in transaction. That's something that you really don't want to see, because what that means is that the application has opened a transaction. You started doing something, and then it's got distracted. It's stopped. The transaction is open, but it's not sending it any more queries. Often that's poorly written code. I know, Stian, we don't write poorly, but often it not so great code. I mean, somebody may have opened the transaction, done a few things, and then decided to head off and send an SMS or something and eventually come back to it and eventually do something, eventually close it. This thing, and in this case, it doesn't look too bad. There's a few of them like that. But often you'll find that yellow stuff starts to take over. When that's happening, that's when you need to call for help. It's usually not something you're going to be easily able to mitigate from a configuration perspective. How am I doing? Tito, move us on. What do I got next? I made these 2 days ago, so I can't actually remember what comes next because I didn't look. Yeah, this is something we talked about as well. This is something else that it's probably again related to some transaction is blocking. The point is, if you can see this, then it's possible to get into the database to repair it, right? You can find out what's that transaction that's holding all the locks and kill it and let everything free again. If you're not looking at it like this, then all you see is that the application has slowed down and suddenly it doesn't work and I can't log in. The point about having instrumentation is that they give you some clue of where you need to start looking. The other useful thing, I guess, is that these things are really good communication boundary objects. You know, when your system is down and you want to you know somebody in Oslo. I know they're proper channels, but usually you know somebody. Stian is the backend guy. All your backend problems, send it to Stian and Amin, by the way. If they get lots of email, they'll start fixing things. So you want to tell them something. Oh, my database is not behaving properly. This kind of stuff is really valuable to tell them, rather than just saying it's slow. Okay, what do we got? Yeah, this is an interesting one, which again you get out of what I like about Munin is all these things are pre-configured. If you're setting up Grafana or stuff, you have to make the ones that you need. I know there are some standardized dashboards, but this kind of thing, it's kind of useful to know that there's a query here has been running for many, many hours. It seems to happen regularly. I've seen systems where a query has been running for 3 days. Right? Now we don't know what that query is for. We do that. It probably isn't going to return a result to anybody anyway.
And the reverse proxy timed it out after 10 minutes.
Yeah, but it could be a back-end process or something that's running. But even so, anything that's running for many hours like that, it pays then. At that point, you know, you've now got to change tack. You now need to go and look in more detail at your database and find out what query has been running for 4 hours and, if possible, kill it. There are all kind of tactics you can use around just checking the long queries in your database and killing ones which meet certain conditions that have been running for a certain amount of time. We've got 3 or 4 different scripts that different people have written that just do that, right? Long query killers, because yeah, particularly something like often there's be an analytics query. Somebody has tried to make some crazy analytics requests of everybody in the whole of Bangladesh, and it even if it does ever return, no one will be there to read the result of it anyway. So those kind of ones, you can just have a cron job running every 2 minutes, and everything that's been running for longer than whatever, kill it off. Either way, it's useful to know when you have these ghosts running in the back of your system. Oh, we're still in Munin. Yeah, I wanted to show this one really just because of this shark fin feature. Anybody who's run DHIS2 over a long period of time, you'll be familiar with this. You've got to be careful because it typically happens in the night. It's the way that analytics works. That sometime in the night you kick off analytics and it starts to generate a huge amount of temporary tables. Right? It generates the kind of analytics tables. And after it's got them all, it then deletes what it's done, and you're left with the actual. It deletes the temporary tables, and you're left with this. So the problem with this is that depending how your database is configured, it's typically related to the dimensionality, how many categories you have, how many org units you have, right? Because they in the end turn into columns. So what happens is you think this system is running fine with 1.6 terabytes. You could look at that and say, well, if I had a 2 terabyte disk, I'm good for the next 6 months. But in fact, you're not, because every night it does that, right? And sometimes this can be double the size, the resting size on the disk. So it's a really important thing to consider when you're thinking about how big a disk you need. Don't just look at how big it is on disk during the day. You need to know what it does and how sharp that tooth is. I think some of that might get changed over the next year if we succeed in moving the analytic stuff out of the main Postgres database. But for the moment, that's a historic problem. Then, of course, when you find in your database that you have problems. I remember we looked at that lock problem. We looked at the thing with the yellow stuff. If you have problems with your database, we've got a nice little script. If you've installed the server tools called DHIS2 DB Activity, all that does is it goes and looks at all the queries in your database and lists them in terms of how long they've been running for. Right? So it's a way to check, and it's also you use something like this if you're going to try to kill one. One of the things I've often had to do, because sometimes problems, I mean, they happen when they happen, and they might not be at the time you're looking at them. You can run something like this, take samples, and then go back and look at your samples to see what was actually running at different times of the day. Yeah, there's various tools that are useful for understanding what's going on in your Postgres database. I tend to generally write most of my own, just with SQL queries. Things like pgtop is nice. Yeah. How am I doing? Do I have time to talk about Glowroot, or am I being thrown off?
We've got about 5 minutes.
Okay, good. Okay, so that was Munin and the kind of things that it shows you. It's very similar to other things, right? Whether you're using Zabbix or Solar Winds is a thing I see occasionally in places that have VMware licenses. I've never seen one that's configured properly, but I've seen it. Glowroot is a different beast altogether. It falls into the category of something that they call a APM, huh? What an application profile, something or other. Glowroot is like profiles you're running JVM. It's really easy to run alongside your Tomcat. It's just a single line of configuration to tell it to use the agent. It's very, very, very low overhead. We kind of recommend anybody who's running the application in a Java virtual machine, they should have this thing running alongside. It's like a web-based profiler because it gives you enormous amount of useful stuff, particularly when things are struggling. So one of the things, this is like the first screen you would see. Well, not quite the first screen, but it's in there. You've got a little bar down the right there, which is just showing you all your web transactions, and they're listed by default by percent of total time. In other words, which one is using the most of your CPU. So it's very clear here that if you are looking to fix anything or improve or speed anything up on this machine, you've got to look at the API data value sets. If you can improve anything there, you're going to make a big impact. Everything else is fairly minor, other than the validation rules is getting up there as well. So one of the things, the Glowroot just gives you that rundown so you can look at it and see where it makes sense to start looking further. This is interesting, Jason. This is old, the same problem that we still see recently. This is a lot of people trying to post aggregate data in parallel, and it uses far more CPU than you really would imagine that it should. But one of the nice things on Glowroot, you get this opportunity to see the slow traces. Now, these ones you can interrogate in detail. So we just take a sample. I want to click on one of those, and let's just see what's going on in those dots. Can you click for me, Tito? Okay. And then you get into what's actually going on here. And in this particular case, it shows you what the queries are. So sometimes the problem is because the database is slow. In this case, the problem doesn't seem to be that at all. If you look at the JVM thread stats main thread, one of the things you see is allocated memory 26 gigabytes. To import one little data value set, maybe 200 value. I didn't see the payload. This thing is just using a huge amount of memory, right? So immediately you can see where the limit is there. You can see why this thing is 58%. The reason why you probably had to buy so many CPUs is probably just because of this. The nice thing about this is because of not so much a bug as an inefficiency, but it's surfaced again more recently, and I think now we're actually in the process of fixing it fundamentally. A lot of it has got to do with the excessive validation that's going on, or the validation just being done in not a very efficient way. Um, I think that problem is fixed, or very, very nearly fixed. Yeah, good. Anything else do I have, or do I pass you on soon? Yeah, this is just another example of on this system. Now, this one is different. This one, you see, has got a problem getting tracked entity instances. So again, if I see that this system is slow, I know I'm going to look at tracked entity instances rather than data values, right? Because my profiler is giving me this. I can't remember what the exact problem with it was. It's just slow. It could be there's just a lot of tracked entity instances in there. Most likely, there's an index that you can put into your database that can speed it up. But at least you know where you got to start looking. Peter, where am I? And then you get a basic look at your JVM. There's lots of gauges to look at. Again, you get this with most monitoring tools that can speak to Java. But you get it on your Glowroot as well, so it's nice to have it out of the box. So that's current status, if you like. Most of the systems out there that, at least if they're using this server tools, they're running with Munin installed and with Glowroot installed. But it's not the only way to do it, and it's not all that there is to do. Over to you, Jason. Do you want this thing?
Yeah, maybe you can give it to Tito. I think he's next. Great. Thanks, Bob. That was very useful, I think, to show kind of the fundamentals of, why we care about monitoring. I wanted to talk today about the DHIS2 metrics API. How many of you have any type of monitoring tools in place? So a few. How many of you have your metrics API enabled on your DHIS2 instance? So I see one hand to a couple. I wanted to plug this API because I think it's one of those features of DHIS2 that very few people know about. It's there, it's kind of out of the box, and I wanted to talk in detail today about what's capable. DHIS2 exposes a number of metrics, very useful metrics out of the box that can be used or basically scraped, collected. Scraped is normally the terminology we use when talking about collecting metrics into various tools, particularly Prometheus and Grafana, which Tito will show us in a minute. These metrics include API activity, so which endpoints are being accessed, how long do the requests take, what is the average time of the requests, and that's for all the endpoints, right, across the entire application, basically. JVM status, a lot of the very similar types of metrics that we saw with Munin are exposed: heap usage, garbage collection, CPU usage, JDBC, whole bunch of things that we'll see in more detail. Database pool activity, how many connections are we using, how many are idle, how many are active. cache metrics have also been exposed. I don't think that this is so relevant for most people. This is probably more relevant for developers, but it can be very useful for diagnosing some of these weird types of problems that we see if the system starts chewing CPU. A lot of this often comes down to a lot of Java objects being allocated and then very quickly sort of garbage collected. And you'll see that as a huge flux basically in the cache. So if you're trying to debug something, you can enable this, but normally you probably don't want to enable this particular set of metrics unless you're really looking at something in detail. Yeah, it's important. I'm not going to tell you exactly how to do this, but it is documented in the documentation site. You can ask that little AI bot how to do it, or if you are lucky, you can find it. But if you search like DHIS2 metrics, you'll figure out how to enable this in your configuration file. It's documented there basically. But it does need to be done there. You can't do it through the API or through the application interface. You've got to do it in the configuration file. Oh, I'm here. So yeah, I mentioned this, the web API metrics, they're grouped by URI. So for instance, analytics, tracked entity, data value sets. You get the total number of requests. You get the total time spent on the requests, and you get the maximum time of each request. And so from that, you can also calculate the average, basically. So by taking the sum and taking the count, you can then divide those using a tool like Grafana, and this will give you the average time per URI, basically. What you don't get with Prometheus, which you do get with tools like Grafana, are the actual parameters. So this is kind of aggregated metrics. You don't get the exact parameters that people are calling. Prometheus, or sorry, Micrometer, which is the kind of underlying technology that is used to collect these metrics, it sort of ignores basically the parameters. It doesn't tell you exactly what parameters were used and which endpoint, but it does aggregate it based on URI. Yeah. JVM metrics, very similar to what we saw with Munin. We get things like memory used, threads and their state, how many threads are active, are they running, garbage collection pauses. That's very important because a lot of times what you'll see is that the application just kind of stops. And the reason that it stops is that the JVM basically has to pause and sort of do a whole bunch of garbage collection and then resume operation. So this is a really important one. If you see that you may have memory pressure or the application is sort of under provisioned, monitoring basically what happens in this garbage collection can be very important. Yeah, load and CPU usage, garbage collection pressure. These things are metrics that sort of come out of the box, and I'll show you a dashboard maybe in a minute about how you can use those. These are some sample metrics basically, and one of the great things about Grafana is that you can make your own dashboards. Maybe I need to take a step back and explain what these two tools are. I think Tito will mention this. Prometheus basically is a time series database. So there's kind of two components to this. You have a component called Prometheus that connects to the API. It collects those snapshot of the metrics for a particular instant in time and then stores that in a time series format. Grafana, on the other hand, is simply a visualization tool. It has many, many different data sources, Prometheus being one of them. But Prometheus is actually the sort of underlying database that is used, can be used. There's many other data sources that can be used as well with Grafana. But Prometheus just takes a snapshot and says, what are all of these metrics at a particular point in time, basically. So here we've got like number of threads. We can see, the peak, live, maximum. And the really nice thing is that there are a lot of dashboards that are available sort of out of the box that Uber geeks have created, people that know this type of stuff a lot better. So you don't always have to create these dashboards from scratch. There are several of them that are available kind of out of the box. I think Tito will talk about this. But there's quite a lot that's already out there so that you don't have to kind of reinvent the wheel, basically. Yeah. This is another just example, in terms of like JDBC connections. This was a really simple graph that I put together just to show that, more or less the same thing can be accomplished with Grafana as Munin. The downside, of course, is that it may require a little bit more work on the administrator's part to get all of your dashboard set up. Whereas Munin sort of takes that burden off of you, right? A lot of these graphs are kind of out of the box. Next one. I'll just mention this really quickly because I think maybe even the developers don't know about this. But I did want to say that Morton has fixed this in at least the latest version, maybe backported it to 42, I'm not sure. But we've also exposed a lot of these very internal types of cache metrics to see how is the cache performing. Like I said, generally only interest to developers, but I wanted to just put this in there for the sake of completion. This is just an example of that, basically, that these metrics, these cache metrics can be pulled into to Grafana. You get kind of a heat map to see, how hot is my cache, what is being garbage collected, what is being used, what is not being used. That's of particular interest if you maybe are experiencing some type of performance problem in the system. You see a lot of garbage collection happening, then you can sort of interrogate these EH cache, second level Hibernate cache metrics in detail. I also wanted to mention two special metrics endpoints. Most of the metrics that we've talked about are things that are related to the performance of the system. CPU usage, disk usage, those are typically metrics that you would collect maybe once every 15 seconds, once every 30 seconds, once every minute, relatively quickly, because you want to get a times, basically a time series. There's always, of course, a cost of doing that. It should not be very high, but you will definitely, you are going to incur some type of CPU usage, network usage, things like that to collect this type of data. So you probably don't want to be collecting it every second. Maybe you want to collect it every 30 seconds, right? There are two special endpoints that we've added that are long-term metrics. And these are related to data integrity and all of the metrics that are available in the data summary. The metadata integrity is like, we explained this in the talk yesterday, but there we expose all of the metadata integrity checks in this Prometheus text format. And so Prometheus can basically scrape this endpoint. It understands the format more or less. And these you might only want to collect once a day to say, okay, what is the current state of my metadata integrity in the system? You don't want to do that every 15 minutes or every 15 seconds, but maybe once a day and say, okay, I had 500 validation rule or 500 organization units with trailing spaces yesterday. I did some stuff and I've got 200 today. And from that, you can use Grafana and Prometheus to kind of track the evolution of the system over time. Similar with the data summary, you get statistics such as active users, data values and events that have been updated, enrollments that have been updated, and some system information, as well as object counts, number of indicators, number of data elements. There's several there, basically. And so those are also sort of longer term internal metrics that you can collect and monitor. I've started with 5,000 organization units and I'm getting 100 more every week, basically, and see over time, how is the system evolving? Yeah, just as an example of this is a custom Grafana dashboard that we've been working on and hope to also include in the server tools. But this is just an example of those custom metric endpoints where we can basically monitor the number of events updated by day, active users. We can see, events posted per second using the metrics that we get out of DHIS2, logins per second. All of these could potentially be useful. A lot of people are always asking, what are people doing with DHIS2? What are my users doing? And this is one way to see what they are doing. How long is it taking? And basically, what is the activity in the system? Yeah, summary. yeah, I just wanted to be sure that everybody was aware that we do have quite good metrics. There's a lot more that could be done. I know that there's talk, I'm looking at Stian there, of exposing more metrics and telemetry. Very useful for tracking usage and diagnosing performance issues. It's very different type of metrics than what you get out of Glowroot, which tends to be very much transaction oriented. These are sort of longer term things where you can look at trends over time. Yeah, I mentioned this Prometheus text exposition format. This is a standard format that is used by Prometheus. That's kind of what we're promoting at this particular point in time. And just to point out that the server and implementation team are working together on creating a kind of standard DHIS2 Grafana dashboard. You know, what are the important metrics to monitor with that are coming out of the DHIS2 metrics API, so that people don't have to recreate that dashboard for themselves if they choose to use this stack. I'll stop there, turn it over to Tito. Yeah, well, you're the server.
Thank you. Thank
This,
you.
yeah.
Yeah. So a lot has been said with the monitoring, and I'm just going to show us a few ways that we can get these tools using already existing server tools, DHIS2 server tools. These tools out of the box supports, getting Munin and Glowroot. If you don't do anything, you don't change your configuration. It enables you to set your preferred monitoring tool. And as you can see here, you can either set it to Munin or Grafana, and for the DHIS2 instance, then you can use app monitoring tool called Glowroot. So you're going to have an app monitoring tool, Glowroot, and either Munin or Grafana. So for the Munin, you don't need to do much. It's pretty straightforward setting it up, and it's also easy to configure. But for Grafana, you'll have to have two servers. One is Prometheus, which is going to be the database of your, scraping data from the endpoints and storing in time-based database, time series database. And the data from the Prometheus now would be visualized using Grafana, which is now where you're gonna be consuming, whatever the dashboards that you want to generate. So initially we had support for the Munin, and right now we've added support for the last. I mean, I did that for the last 3 months, and right now we have something out of it, which I'm going to show us in a very quick video. So we have 3 components. One is the server itself, which is going to scrape data from the components that you're monitoring. And here we have the Linux node, because in most cases, our deployments usually are on Ubuntu LTS releases. So we want to gather metrics on how our server is performing, how the resources that we have are being utilized, and whether we need to scale it up or down. And on top of that, we want to have more information on how our PostgreSQL database also is performing. And for the Linux node and the PostgreSQL database, they don't usually have API endpoints that our Grafana Prometheus can connect to and scrape some data from, but they have exporters. And what exporters do is that they gather information from the node that they're monitoring, could be a Linux node or PostgreSQL, and then they convert that data in a format that Prometheus is going to understand. Then Prometheus is then going to connect to the exporter, could be a Linux node exporter or PostgreSQL exporter, and then it's going to visualize the same data on dashboards that you develop on the Grafana endpoints. So all these can be a lot of work. Like you have to install Grafana, Prometheus, link them together, and then you configure also the firewall so that it has like that connectivity between your monitoring tool and the node that you're monitoring, and then you have to configure, scraping configuration and so forth. And it's good to have all this automated in a way. And from the previous slide, I showed you that you can only set, with the tools, you can only set the server monitoring tool to be either Prometheus or Munin, and it's going to give you that by default. So right now, I've also automated dashboard generation for the Linux host and also PostgreSQL database. But work is in progress also to sort of have default dashboard for the DHIS2 metrics endpoint that Jason showed us. So already that is enabled by automated. The process of enabling that is automated, but now the only work remaining is just to at least have dashboards that would visualize the same data. Okay, so next slide is now going to show us how you can do that in a very small video. So this is going to download the tools from GitHub, and then you just create an inventory host, and then you edit that, and then you set your domain for your deployment. And after that, you also set server monitoring to Grafana, and then you run your deployment. So this is going to take maybe 10 minutes, but I've speed up the video so that it takes less than a minute. And then after that, you can just access it. So you'll see in this task that the tasks that are going to be installing Prometheus, Grafana, configuring the linking between the two, and also the data scraping from the nodes that you're going to be monitoring. And then at the end of it all, it's going to auto-generate dashboards for you. And right now we have 2 dashboards for the Linux host, or whatever the Linux host that you're going to be monitoring, and PostgreSQL. You see there are 2 dashboards created by default right now. Yeah. Yeah. And then it's also going to have Glowroot, the one that Bob showed us. And it's going to have lots of metrics and an instance that you had installed with the tools. Yeah. That's all.
Thanks.
Yeah, that was good. Wow, that was really nice, Ito. Thanks for that. Okay, I think we've got time for questions. Just to be aware, we do have this fire drill or whatever national emergency test in 5 minutes, but yeah, we can go ahead and start taking questions. We've got a few from the field, or sorry, the online chat, but we can start here in the room. Who's all these?
Thank you very much for your presentation and really useful. Mine are just for Tito, because we have seen the importance of all the monitoring tools, starting with the Munin that we've been using, the Glowroot, but also now you have added the Grafana. So in your script or the server script, is it possible, because I've been following, it looks like now you have an option whether you decide for Munin or for Grafana. Is that so, or is there we can add all of them? Because at some point, these monitoring tools, it's like complement each other. Okay, there's some information that can be easily interpreted in the Munin that probably cannot be easily interpreted in either of the two. So, is your tool also have been taken care of that, or you have to install one among the Munin or Grafana?
Right now, you choose one, but we can see what to do about that. Yeah.
Thanks for. Okay, I have a simple question. It's basically actually just wanted an explanation of the previous slide. It was actually about the ideal DHIS2 connections. I noticed that you can easily interpret what it means when the heaps are going high. But I'm wondering, what does it actually mean because there was a dive. So what does that mean specifically? And another question is that now on the tools, I'm not really getting the part of like, is there a way that we can be able to get somewhere where we can get to configure the other, say for instance, you like almost a similar one like that one that he said, like if you needed more of the monitoring tool, but then now in this case, I wanted to actually maybe make the graphs on you using Grafana, but I wanted to put up the other graphs that are probably visible in Munin, but in this Grafana now. Will there be a way where I can be able to go and benchmark to see if I can be able to make this graph in Grafana? I can be able to do it like this, well, somewhere. Thank you.
There were a couple of questions there. The first one was related to sort of the peaks and valleys, specifically related to heap size, right? Bob, I'll let you handle that. I didn't see anything on heap per se, but I think maybe here on this.
I think I know the one he means, but it's similar. It's just this up and down thing. That is a different one. Can mean many things. The trouble with these things is often the first step is to be able to see them, but then interpreting it can mean different. I don't think it. Yeah, it was the JDBC thing. Maybe we can find it after. But yeah, the pool will also do that. It has a daily cycle, and that's the other thing about monitoring your system, because everybody's system is going to behave a little bit different. One of the benefits of actually physically just looking at it every day, you become familiar with what is normal. And what is normal in your system, you're typically going to see these cycles, things going up and down. And if you see something different, like it's going up and down more often or going higher, then because your system, you'll be familiar with that. You'll know something is up. On the customizing, yeah, I think everybody will be able to customize their own dashboards for sure. And I think everything that is there on Munin would fairly easily be put into a Grafana dashboard. It just hasn't been done yet. One of my problems, everybody loves Grafana, but I don't think I've ever seen a Grafana installation which has been fully configured. They're all work in progress.
Yeah, I'll just say that, I think that's probably right. I think, and this was one of the questions in the chat, are there dashboards available from Grafana? Yeah, there's a lot that's out there. There's stuff with PostgreSQL, the dashboard that Tito showed with Node. Node basically just gives you all of these CPU sort of system related metrics. And that's just a dashboard that you can just install directly into Grafana. You don't have to replicate all of that stuff. So there's a lot of that's already available that you don't have to replicate. But a lot of these very specific DHIS2 things, no, that's not there yet. It's something that the implementation team is working on and hope to also include as part of the server tools so that not everybody has to create their own Grafana dashboard, basically.
I think the interesting thing is going to be like with the Kubernetes gang, right? And there's folk using Docker Compose, and it's basically a bit of a bit more adventurous, perhaps, though, right? Than these tools that Tito and I have worked on for a long time. You're going to have to do a lot of it yourself. There's no out of the box thing. And that's a good and a bad thing. The good thing is that you use the stuff that you like to use. The bad thing is you might end up like one of these DHIS2 systems which is not sufficiently monitored. And that was my experience of the last Kubernetes system I looked at. It was crashing. Nobody knew why it was crashing. They all just thought they were very clever doing Kubernetes. So yeah, but you'll be monitoring the same kind of things. It's just different ways of hosting containers. Hi.
Thank you for the presentation. Very exciting to see some of the performance metrics that you recommend us to monitor. I have a question about recommended thresholds. Would you have recommended thresholds values for us?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really get into the alerting. I think some of them are obvious. You know, disk usage, obviously, if it gets above 80%, you probably want to send an alert. Sustained CPU usage, you know, longer than 90% for 5 minutes. I mean, there are sort of very accepted types of thresholds. I'm not sure if that answers your question. I don't think that we've got down into that level yet, and I think it may depend a lot on the implementation. You know, I think what Bob and I have tried to show is that the approach that we're showing, that we're exploring right now, is much more kind of an exploratory type of overwatch, right? We didn't talk a lot about alerting. I think it's something we need to work more on and establish those thresholds. But up until now, it's sort of been guys like me and Bob and others that administer servers, maybe not looking at this every day, but looking at it and having the data sources there available when there are problems. But I think, yes, I think it's a good point that we should think about what those thresholds might be.
I think the underlying issue, they probably maybe less about thresholds, more about alerting. When you hit the threshold, you got to alert. We don't have a recommended way of configuring alerting.
No.
And it's kind of difficult to, because that's where people's environments start to get very, very different.
And there's so many different methods.
But there's more we should do, I think, in terms of recommending what sort of thresholds to alert on and how to alert. Right, the Russians have come minutes ahead for the bunkers.
So everything's fine for everybody online. This is just a test of the emergency system. Don't be alarmed. The Russians are not invading. Yep. Yeah. So I think we'll take one more question. But if anybody wants to go, please feel free. But yeah, there's one more question. Yeah, exactly. We were just talking about alerting. We probably don't need to use something this extreme, but yeah, it's a good point.
The example of ignoring alerts.
Okay, I'm gonna give a plug for your server tools experts session. If you have specific questions, maybe for Bob and Tito or myself about this, then we can talk more details.
Yeah, between 4 and 5.
Between 4 and 5 today. Yeah. Thank you very much.
have the feedback slide. I don't think people are really filling it in anyways, but.
Yes, and if you have any feedback, please feel free to scan the QR code. You can tell us, here's the feedback if you are interested. Thank you. Thank you for everybody attending online.
Good, Johnny. Sorry, we can do the next. Yeah, no.